In the harsh Wyoming wilderness of 1882, winter winds had swept away all traces of hoofprints when Rowan McAllister caught sight of thin smoke threading upward from the broken chimney of the abandoned Odell homestead, perched along the slope. Of Widow's Ridge, he urged his chestnut horse onward, peering through the fading daylight. Another snowfall threatened the gray sky. Word around town was that the widow woman and her daughters had been left destitute. 6 months prior, her husband had vanished with another woman, never to return. The community had long since stopped mentioning her name, but Rowan hadn't forgotten. Moving carefully from his saddle, he balanced a wrapped bundle of provisions against one arm while gripping a milk jar with his free hand. A single knock brought the weathered door creaking partially open. Behind it, a child's cautious face appeared, dotted with freckles and filled with suspicion. "Hello there," Rowan spoke softly. "Brought you some bread and fresh milk?" The door widened. The child glanced back into the cabin's darkness before stepping away from the entrance. She appeared to be around 9 or 10 years old, thin as a fence, post-swimming in an oversized winter coat. Her younger sister sat cross-legged on the rough floor, wrapped in a mended blanket, her face flushed from the bitter cold. There, crouched by the stone fireplace, coaxing life into dying embers with scraps of tinder, knelt Lauren Odell herself. Every muscle in Rowan's body seemed to freeze. She rose gradually, wiping her palms against her worn dress. Loose strands had escaped from where she'd pinned her hair back. Exhaustion marked her features. This wasn't ordinary fatigue that rest could cure. It was the bone-deep weariness that comes from shouldering burdens far too heavy for far too long. "Rowan," she said, placing his face. "Was checking the creek," he explained, extending the food toward her. "Figured I'd drop these off." Her fingers hesitated before accepting his offering. "Much obliged," she replied. He nodded, at a loss for additional words. Both children had fallen silent, observing him intently. The older girl clutched the bread protectively against her body. Lauren avoided his gaze momentarily, placing the milk vessel near the cooking stove and pressing her palm against the cool glass as though willing it to warm more quickly. "Managing okay up here?" he inquired. "We get by," came her response. "What supply holding out?" "Well enough." He couldn't determine whether she was being dishonest or simply tired of interrogation. His eyes surveyed their surroundings. Cabin's construction was solid, but time had taken its toll. Feed sacks had been nailed across a rear window. A single wooden chair stood beside a narrow bed tucked in one corner with a chipped dish drying on a cloth nearby. "Could deliver more tomorrow," he offered. She met his eyes then, her expression alert yet not harsh. "What for?" He lifted his shoulders. "Got surplus." Lauren considered him briefly before offering a slight nod of agreement. "All right then." That evening, Rowan rode homeward beneath storm-laden clouds, cold air slicing through his collar. He couldn't dismiss the expression he'd seen in her eyes. She hadn't requested assistance, yet she hadn't refused it either. Come morning, he returned with fresh eggs and another loaf. The day following brought salt-cured pork, then root vegetables. Always respectful, always brief in his visits, he never lingered. Just long enough to confirm the children were fed, to verify smoke still rose from their chimney. By the fourth morning, little Vera, as Lauren addressed her, rushed to greet him at the door. Her smile revealed gaps where baby teeth had fallen out. "You brought more bread," she exclaimed. Rowan's face creased with amusement. "Sure did." That afternoon, Lauren stepped onto her small porch, arms wrapped around herself, her shawl drawn close. "You needn't keep making this trip," she stated. "Understood," he replied. "I can handle this situation myself." "I believe you can," he agreed. "But meanwhile, I've got more supplies than I require." She lowered her gaze, snow crunching under her feet. "It's been an endless winter," acknowledged with a nod. "That it has." Her eyes blinked rapidly as she turned away, her jaw set firmly. "I'm grateful." He touched his hat brim. "See you come morning." And indeed he did. Every single day for 7 days straight. Her demeanor gradually transformed, less defensive, more vitality in her complexion. Began waiting outside when he arrived. Occasionally she'd send her daughters indoors so they could speak briefly about the climate. Her livestock, trivial matters really, yet it meant something. On that seventh day, Rowan arrived later than usual. He'd spent hours moving fence materials. And his spine ached, but he still carried warm bread from the oven and milk wrapped carefully in cloth. Lauren approached him outside. Behind her, the sky had turned golden, the breeze now gentle. The storm's fury had finally passed. She accepted. His bundle then hesitated. "This doesn't have to continue," she repeated. "I realize that," he said, his voice softer now, "but I've brought something additional today." Her eyes lifted to his. He drew a deep breath before meeting her gaze directly. "I've brought my heart as well if you're willing to accept it." She stared at him, the winter chill between them suddenly forgotten. He swallowed hard. "I know it seems sudden, perhaps reckless, but I see who you are. I see how you battle for those children, how you persevere. And I would gladly ride through blizzards every day for the remainder of my life if it meant you wouldn't face this alone." Lauren studied the bread cradled in her arms, then returned her attention to him. Tears gathered in her eyes, but her smile emerged slowly and genuinely. "You're not reckless," she whispered. "And I see you too." He extended his hand, brushing away a loose strand from her face. Without thinking, she pressed her cheek into his palm. "I never expected anyone would come," she breathed. "But I did," he assured her. "I came." The door squeaked behind them as Vera's head appeared. "Mama, will Rowan join us for dinner?" Lauren laughed quietly, never breaking eye contact with him. "Yes, he will." The following evening found Rowan returning with dried apple slices, tucked in his saddlebag and a bundle of firewood secured behind his saddle. The path up Widow's Ridge was treacherous from melting snow, forcing his horse to navigate carefully around deep ruts and stones. Smoke now rose consistently from the chimney, not robust or thick, but steady. And that steadiness calmed something within his chest. When Lauren answered the door this time, she didn't retreat. She held it open with one hand while cradling her, sleeping youngest daughter against her shoulder with the other. Flour dust marked her blouse at the waist, and she'd twisted her hair into a knot at her neck's base. "I've started churning milk for butter," she announced before he could speak. "It's modest, but it's progress." He handed over the apples. "These'll help with the girls' teeth, provided they don't devour them immediately." Her smile appeared thinner than before. "I've already explained they must last the entire month." He entered without waiting for invitation. The interior felt warmer than previously. He detected something faintly sweet, a pot of cornmeal porridge simmering on the stove. "Your wrists. Still troubling you?" he asked, noticing her movement as she settled Vera onto the cot. She flexed her fingers. "Less than before. I stopped splitting wood myself. I use the axe head and leverage my weight." "That's still more difficult than it should be," he observed, crouching near the stove. "I can stack chopped cedar by your shed. You already provide plenty. Doesn't matter." She chose not to argue. Instead, she moved to the shelf and retrieved a small tin cup. "I boiled spruce needles with honey. It's not proper tea, but it's soothing." He accepted the cup from her fingers, his thumb grazing her palm's edge. "Thank you. You're the first person to thank me for anything in quite some time," she said softly. He sipped carefully. The taste was bitter and sharp, yet warm. "People have short memories," he remarked, "especially when the hardship belongs to someone else." She crossed her arms, leaning against the beam supporting the low ceiling. "When he abandoned us, one neighbor told me it was likely a blessing. As though being alone with 2 children to feed and no money for necessities was somehow merciful." He set down the cup and looked at her directly. "Ever consider leaving this place?" She shook her head firmly. "Impossible. The girls were born. Within these walls, there's a natural spring beyond the ridge, and fertile soil come spring thaw. This is home, even now." He nodded once, quietly understanding. "Were you ever married?" she asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on the floor. "No," he replied. "Came close once." She had second thoughts. Lauren remained silent for a moment, then crossed to the window too. "Draw the curtain closed." "I used to believe the most difficult part would be his departure," she said. "But it's the remaining that exhausts you. Staying when surrendering would be simpler." He approached her slowly. Then it's fortunate you're so incredibly stubborn. She turned toward him. You don't need to keep appearing here. I know. I don't expect anything from you. He studied her for a long moment. I offered my heart, Lauren, not merely my assistance. Her breath caught, but she maintained eye contact. I can't promise this will be simple, she warned. I bear more burdens than I can articulate. I'm not frightened of your burdens, he said. I've carried my own. They stood in the stillness that follows honesty, the fire crackling behind them. The children asleep, the wind finally quiet outside. Eventually, Lauren reached for his hand, not hesitantly, but deliberately. If you intend to remain, Rowan, she said, then stay for everything. The difficult days included. He enclosed her hand in his. I don't appear for the easy moments. She leaned against him then, her forehead resting just below his collarbone. He held her there, solid as a fence post, warm as the hearth they'd kindled between them. Spring's arrival was gradual that year, lingering through March and well into April, before the final snow softened into mud and the creek behind the ridge ran clear. Rowan spent most mornings repairing his lower pasture fence, but by late afternoon, he rode to Lauren's place with whatever he could spare: rope, seeds, a handful of old nails wrapped in cloth. He never arrived empty-handed, and she never allowed him to depart without supper. That particular evening, he discovered her hunched over a broken hinge, attempting to coax the barn door back into position with a rusty hammer and more determination than leverage. You're favoring your left foot, he observed as he dismounted. She gave the hinge one final strike before straightening, stepped awkwardly in the root cellar. I'll recover. You always say that. I'm always correct, she said, brushing dust from her skirt. He gently took the hammer from her and examined the hinge. It's bent at the pin. Needs replacement. Suspected as much. We have another inside, but the screws are missing. I'll bring some tomorrow. She looked at him, quiet for a beat. Do you ever tire of repairing what doesn't belong to you? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he knelt and inspected the wood around the hinge, then finally stood. Belongs to me now. Lauren didn't smile, but her eyes held something steady and peaceful. Then you should start learning where things are kept. He followed her inside where the girls were shelling beans into a tin basin. The older one, Clara, offered him a handful. Some are mushy, she warned. I can manage, he said, and she nodded seriously as though that settled the matter. Lauren handed him the replacement hinge from a drawer near the stove. Her fingers brushed his, but she remained silent. As evening settled, Rowan stayed to help repair the barn. They worked together, her holding the door steady against the wind, while he secured the new hinge in place. When the final screw was set, she leaned her shoulder against the frame and gazed toward the tree line. The wild roses will bloom soon, she mentioned. They always appear before anything else. I could transplant a few and plant them nearer to the porch, he suggested. She glanced at him. You know where to find them? They grow along my east field's border. She was quiet a moment. You remember everything, don't you? Only what's important. Later, after the girls had retired and the last embers in the stove glowed softly, Lauren poured 2 mugs of boiled chicory. They sat across from one another at the table, worn smooth by years of use. The lamp between them flickered in the draught, casting warm golden light across her cheekbones and the curve of her throat. Rowan sipped carefully, watching her over the rim. Still keep a rifle by the door, he observed. She met his gaze steadily. I won't stop if that's your concern. I'm not asking you to. Just wondering if you feel any safer now. I'm uncertain. She said, but I'm less weary. He nodded once, understanding more than he expressed. She reached for her mug, but didn't drink. I used to listen for hoofbeats every night. Thought perhaps he'd return. Not because I wanted him to, but because I needed to confront him first, and now I don't listen anymore. He set his mug down slowly. That's a form of peace. I didn't think I'd ever discover any, she said, then added after a pause. Not with someone else. But you didn't discover it with me, he said. You created it. I simply appeared. She looked at him across the table, her eyes clear. You remained. I will continue remaining The lamplight caught in her hair, and she reached across the table, resting her hand over his. Her grip was firm, not uncertain. "I can't offer you comfort," she said, "not luxury. Just a roof patched with bark and days that begin before sunrise. I never requested anything else. And I have 2 girls who still weep sometimes when they think I'm not aware. I believe I can carry 2 more hearts if you'll allow me." She drew in a gentle breath, her fingers tightening around his. "Then you should be here come morning. The henhouse latch is broken. I'll bring my tools." They sat a while longer, neither rushing to break the silence. When he finally rose to leave, she walked him to the door and stood just outside on the step, the cool air loosening her hair. "I don't understand how you knew to come that first day," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "I simply saw smoke and thought perhaps someone still believed the fire was worth maintaining. And now I know with certainty." She leaned in then, close enough that her breath reached his collar, then returned tomorrow and the day following. He touched her cheek with the back of his fingers reverently. "I will, Lauren, for all my remaining days if you'll have me." She didn't reply with words. She didn't need to. She stepped forward and kissed him once, honest and sure, like a vow made in the breath between seasons when winter has finally ended, and something new awaits just beneath the thaw, the creek behind. The ridge had begun to swell, heavy with meltwater and fragments of broken ice spinning in the current. Rowan stood knee-deep in the thinning snow, the shovel cutting into thawed earth while the sun descended behind the hills. He worked quietly, sleeves rolled to his elbows, placing each root ball of wild rose into the shallow trench with care. The blossoms wouldn't appear until June, perhaps later, but Lauren had mentioned she favored them, so he brought 5 cut. From his eastern field's edge, at first light, the girls were in the kitchen when he arrived. Clara grinding oats with a stone pestle, Vera attempting to catch flour particles in the air. Lauren was in the loft, her voice drifting down through the slats as she called for them to hang their wraps. Rowan set the folded blanket in the tin of lye soap on the table. "Found these at the trading post," he said. "Thought they might prove useful." Lauren descended the ladder, wiping her hands on her apron.
"Ow."
"We exhausted our soap supply 2 days ago." "I figured," he said. "Your hands have been irritated." She looked at him, then at the blanket. "That's wool. It's clean," he said. "No moth damage." She crossed to the table, running her fingers along the hem. "You didn't need to spend money on us." "I didn't," he said. "Traded for it." Tanner needed help hauling salt barrels. Her eyes lingered on the blanket a moment longer than necessary before meeting his. "You always discover a solution. I don't see the purpose in remaining idle when there's work to be done." Vera approached, tugging at Lauren's skirt. "Mama, can Rowan stay for the story tonight?" Lauren glanced up at him, one eyebrow raised. "She means the tale about the horsemaker's son. You tell it better than I do." "I don't tell it better," Rowan said, crouching beside the girl. "I just use silly voices, so it makes it better." Vera whispered like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He stayed. After the girls had eaten, and the last bowl was rinsed and turned upside down to dry, Rowan took the worn book from the shelf and settled near the hearth. Clara curled under the quilt, Vera on her shoulder. Lauren sat just behind them, sewing. Needle in hand, her foot tucked beneath her, Rowan read until the lamplight flickered low, his voice gentle around the words. When the story ended, the girls were already asleep. "You don't have to ride back tonight," Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The barn's warm enough, and there's feed in the bin." Rowan looked up at her. "You certain?" She nodded. "I have a spare blanket." He helped her carry it out. The moon was high, casting silver over the fields and roof lines. The barn creaked gently. As the wind slipped through the slats, "I mended the torn saddle pad," she said, setting the blanket on the hay bale. "It's in better condition now, I noticed," he said. "Thanks." She lingered by the open door, the lantern in her hand casting a faint glow down her sleeve. "You've created space here," she said after a while. "Not just room, space." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that her warmth reached him. "I wasn't certain if I should. I wasn't certain anyone would." Rowan looked at her, the way her hair caught the lantern light, the quiet resolve in her face that had never once wavered, not even in the worst of the cold. I believe I'll need a place to store my belongings soon, he said. She tilted her head. Planning on leaving things behind? No, he said. Planning on staying long enough to need a drawer. Lauren didn't smile, but she reached out and touched the side of his face, thumb grazing the edge of his jaw, like she was memorizing it. There's room in the loft, she said, and the bed's wide enough. He caught her hand in his, pressed it to his chest. I'll make certain you never have to carry all of it alone again. Her eyes didn't waver. I believe you. They stood there, a long time while the night settled in around them, the barn warm behind, the house glowing faintly through the frosted glass window. When she leaned into him, it wasn't sudden. It was the kind of closeness built slowly, earned over every long walk, every quiet supper, every word not said. His arms held her like something meant to last, and when they finally parted, it was only so she could say, "Come in before dawn. The girls will want to show you the seed rows." "I'll be there," he said, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "I always am." By early June, the first shoots of green curled through the garden soil behind the house, and the ridge had softened into color again. Rowan built a low fence around the plot with cedar rails he'd split himself, not because animals threatened it, but because Lauren said it helped the girls understand what was theirs to tend. That morning, Lauren stood beside him in the shade of the porch, her hands streaked with sap and dirt, hair damp at the nape from the sun. She watched Clara and Vera kneeling beside the bean rows, their heads bent as they pushed seeds into the earth with quiet concentration. "They've never had a summer like this," she said. "Not one where everything remained stable." Rohan adjusted the brim of his hat. Stable's a good word for it. She turned toward him, her face shaded and thoughtful. "What would you think of building on the north side of the barn? For what purpose? Proper room? There's no space for you upstairs?" "Not unless we're climbing over one another." He rubbed his jaw, considering. "If I build it, I'm building it to share." Her gaze held steady. "That's what I mean." They discussed it the following day. Rowan took measurements with a length of twine. While Lauren drew rough marks on the side of the barn with charcoal, Vera was tasked with holding the extra nails, Clara with keeping the goats from chewing the cart straps. It was a week of long days and rough splinters. But when the frame was raised and the walls chinked, Lauren walked through the doorway and turned to him with her arms folded. "I want a window here," she said, pointing, "so I can see the ridge at dusk." He stepped beside her, looking where she pointed. "You'll have it." That night they sat beneath the stars, backs against the barn wall, their shoulders touching. Lauren's hair was still damp from washing, the smell of rosemary clinging faintly to her skin. He held her hand loosely, fingers threaded, neither of them in a hurry. She tilted her head against his shoulder. "Never thought I'd be warm again in the way that matters." He kissed her temple slowly and surely. "You're not alone anymore." "I know," she said, "and I believe it." They were married the following Sunday in the clearing behind the house with the wild roses blooming along the fence and the girls scattering clover heads along the path. Clara wore a blue ribbon Lauren had saved from the sewing tin for 3 years. Vera carried a bundle of sage and pine. Lauren's dress was simple, the same one she wore to town every spring, but Rowan looked at her like she wore the world. Preacher from the Valley Church came up for the ceremony, and afterward they ate cornbread and berry jam and drank tin cups of cider passed between neighbors. No one mentioned the past. No one whispered about what had been, only what was. That night, when the girls were asleep and the house hushed, Rowan stood in the doorway of the new room, watching Lauren fold quilts at the foot of the bed. The window caught the last of the light, casting pale gold across her back. He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned into him without hesitation. "Feels like the house is breathing easier now. So do I." She turned in his arms, her hands resting on his chest. "Did you ever think it would be this?" He shook his head. "I hoped for it, but I didn't expect it." She reached up and brushed, her fingers along the side of his neck, eyes searching his. "I love you, Rowan McAllister." "I know," he said. "And I love you right back." They lay down in the bed they'd built together under a roof they'd thatched with their own hands. The wind moved softly through the trees, the ridge quiet and watchful. He held her close, her head tucked beneath his chin, and when she sighed, it was the sound of someone who had finally come home. Years passed. The roses thickened along the fence line, the garden yielding more with each season. Rowan taught Clara how to fit a saddle properly, and Vera learned to track deer by the shape of their prints. Lauren kept bees, and their honey sold well enough to trade for cotton and flour in town. They never grew wealthy, but the pantry stayed full. The roof never leaked again. Rowan built a cradle the winter the baby came, a boy and red-cheeked, who had his mother's eyes and his father's quietness. Vera sang to him while she shelled peas. And Clara built him a toy horse from scrap wood and twine. One evening after supper, Rowan sat on the porch with the baby in his lap, the girls chasing fireflies in the yard. Lauren settled beside him, her hand resting on his thigh, her face tired in the best way. "You remember the day you first came up the ridge?" she asked. He nodded. "Snow in the air, bread in my hands. I remember wondering how long you'd stay." He turned toward her and kissed her slowly, the kind of kiss that carried every word they'd never had to say. When he pulled back, he rested, his forehead against hers. "I stayed," he said, "and I always will," and he did. Through summers and lean winters, through births and filled root cellars, through long days and quiet nights, they remained rooted, steady and deep, fully loved. Under the same roof, with their hands together and their hearts at rest,